As you recall, whenever you want to view web pages, you would be here on this computer, which is referred to as the client computer, and you would go to your browser and you would request a web page, and the web page request in HTTP protocol would be sent to the local switch. From there, it'd be sent to the router, and that would go over telecommunication lines to your internet service provider. From there, it would get sent to the internet, and it would find its way around the internet until it found the destination ISP and go through telecommunication lines to the web host router. From there, it would be sent along the local area network at the web host until it got to the appropriate web server. On the web server, the HTML files are stored, and so the server would find the appropriate file or files to send back, and they would take the reverse route back to you, all the way back to your computer, where your web browser would interpret the HTML code and display it on the screen. Alright, so this is great. Only issue is HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML is a markup language and not a programming language. So the difference between the two is that a markup language can put content on the screen and it can style it or mark it up, make it look a certain way. But what it can't do is it can't process data. It can't put data through a sequence of logical questions to come up with answers. HTML can't add 1 plus 1, right? So in order to do that, you need a programming language. Now, programming languages, you've probably heard of them, such as C++, C Sharp, Java, JavaScript. There's lots and lots of them, right? In web, there's only certain kinds of programming languages you can use depending on where or how you use it. So in this diagram, once again, the user is known as the client, or the user's computer is known as the client, and the client is getting web pages from the server, the web server, over the internet, right? So there are such things as server-side scripts which run on the server. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to buy something from Amazon.com. I can shop and I can fill up my shopping cart, and when I go to process that shopping cart, I'm going to be sending a request across the internet to Amazon servers, and Amazon servers are going to run scripts that will process my payment. And once they've done that, once they've run those programs on their servers, then they'll send a receipt back in the form of an HTML web page back to my screen. So in that situation, the server is doing all the work, the programming language is running on the server, and all I get to see over here is the result of the program being run in HTML format. Right, so that's called the server-side script. One example would be PHP, another is ASP. There's a variety of different scripts. Not all programming on the web is done on the server, however. On the client was originally built to interpret HTML, but over time it's also been enhanced to also be able to run JavaScript code. And so you can embed JavaScript code into HTML files. You download the HTML files from the server, and when those HTML files are being interpreted, if the browser comes across any JavaScript embedded in that HTML, it will go ahead and run the JavaScript from the client. So that's an example of a client-side script. This is considered quite important. If you look at any posting for any web design or web development job from like monster.com or any place, you will see that the three foundational languages or technologies that pretty much any job in web wants you to know are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So JavaScript is pretty important. Now, JavaScript runs quickly on the client. It's pretty efficient and it runs quickly on the client. However, the JavaScript code itself can be viewed. Just like you can view HTML code, you can view JavaScript code. So it is not at all secure. Server-side scripting like PHP, it runs on the server. The result is an HTML file, and then you download the HTML file. So if you were to look at the code, all you would see is the result of the program, not the program itself. So anytime you're looking for security, it's better to run server-side scripts. But if you're trying to do something quick that doesn't need security, then JavaScript is the way to go. All right, so we're going to take a look at some JavaScript. Let me pull up good old Notepad. And there's a couple different ways that you can go about doing this, but one way to do it is to embed JavaScript directly into your HTML file. So let's create a quick, easy HTML file. HTML, of course we know we got the head section. We got a title. We can call this JS Practice. Close the head section. Oops, I had all caps in there at some point. Okay, here's the body section. And then we'll come all the way down here and close the body section. And then let's go ahead and save this, and I'll call this practice.htm. This is an HTML file, so don't forget that file extension, .htm. Excuse me. All right, so now within the HTML file, we can put whatever HTML content in there we want to. If we're going to do JavaScript, it doesn't have to be only JavaScript. You can mix the two. They work together very nicely. With JavaScript being a programming language, we want to take a look at 4 basic functions. We want to look at the ability of it to produce input or to capture input so that the user can tell it stuff. We want the ability to store that input, to store the data somehow so that we can reuse it. And then we're going to want it to process that data, do something with it. And then we're going to want it to produce some output. So input, storage, processing, output. Those are the things that we're looking to do. As far as input goes, you could have input from different sources, but one place you can get some JavaScript input is by asking the user for it. And so if we're going to create any JavaScript on the page, we're going to want to embed it in the HTML tag script, opening and closing script tags. Now you can get away with running some JavaScript just out there free floating in the middle of HTML. Not the best practice, however. So we're going to put it inside our script tags. And if we wanted to get information off the screen or from somebody entering it, we can use the input command prompt. This means to prompt the user for some information. What information? Well, first of all, one thing you should know is that this is a pretty standardized syntax for a lot of JavaScript. It's called a function. And so prompt is going to run a sequence of events, and it's going to use as input anything that's inside these parentheses. So in this case, the input that we're going to give it is what to say on the screen. So how about we say something like, what is your name? Okay, so notice it has quotation marks. That tells JavaScript that it's a string, that is a sequence of text characters. And it's in parentheses because it's part of a function. And then the semicolon at the end, JavaScript is very in particular about that semicolon. You can't leave it off. Okay, so if we had nothing but this right now, it should run. Let's see if it does. So mine's called practice. And if we open this up, what is your name? It asks us the question. And it brings it up in a little pop-up window. So I can answer the question and say, okay, and that's it. That's all it does. Why does it stop there? Well, the reason it stops there, let me get my notepad back, is that it's doing exactly what I asked. It's prompting the user to this question. But I didn't even bother writing down the answer. I don't know what they said because I haven't gone to the second step, which is to store the data. And so in order to create this, turn this prompt right here into a storage vessel, we need to create a variable. So var is for variable. I can give my variable a name. In this case, I'm just going to call it name. And then I can use this operator to assign a value to it. So basically, these are two kinds of commands working together. The prompt asks the user what the question is, and the result of the prompt function gets returned. And when it gets returned, I'm using this to store that return data into a variable named name. Okay, so I can show it to you on the screen again, but it doesn't look any different. This part where it stores the variable as the name, that is invisible. So you wouldn't even be able to tell that it was doing that. Okay. Now if I want to see this output, I can use the command alert. Alert is kind of like prompt in that it generates a pop-up, but with a prompt, it waits for input. With an alert, it's just a statement. It's not asking the user to do anything. But I can say something like, your name is, now I could just say Jim, right, and be done with it. But in this case, what I wanted to do is use the variable, right? So instead of saying your name is Jim, what I'm going to do right here is add in the variable name. Okay. Now notice what's going on here. This part is in quotation marks because it's a text string. This part is not in quotation marks because it's a variable. I'm looking for a value to be passed from this variable to the screen in this location. Okay. And whenever you have two different kinds of data types, like a string and a variable, in order for them to both coexist within this function, you need to connect them together with this plus sign. So there's a space before and after that plus sign. All right, so let's see what happens when we do this. Refresh. What is your name? Jim. Your name is Jim. Now notice I put is and Jim and it squished them together. The reason for that is that I didn't put a space right here to space out the string from the variable. All right, but you saw it pass the name Jim from here to here so that we got it in the output, which is pretty cool. All right, so that's pretty good. We're looking at we got input, we got storage, and we've got output. Processing, you could argue that what we're doing is processing, but we're going to look at some more complex processing in a little bit here. Another thing that I wanted to show you, and this is kind of an important thing when you're putting JavaScript in the context of web design and development. JavaScript has the ability to reach inside HTML and rewrite it. And so, yes, you can do an alert, which provides a pop-up, but another way you can output is to output directly to the web page itself. All right, so let me show you that. We're going to go up here above the scripting tags, and let's put in a paragraph, and we'll say, your name is Igor. All right. So this is cool. What I need is a way to isolate this name so that I can allow JavaScript to find it. All right. So the way I'm going to isolate it is with these familiar span tags. If you don't remember the span tags, what they do for you is they let you isolate an inline content. So like if it was a block style element, I might use a div. If it was inline content, I can use span, and then I can put any kind of text or anything that's inline content within a span. It's a generic container, basically, that's inline within the sentence. All right, now I can leave it span, but if I want to get even more specific, I can give the span an ID. You know how we do for CSS, right? Well, same idea, except this time we're going to use the ID as an identifier for the purposes of JavaScript rather than for the purposes of whatchamacallit? CSS, right. Okay, so let's get rid of this alert for a minute. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how we can get JavaScript to rewrite this name for us. So there's a thing called the document object model, and the document object model, or DOM, is a hierarchical presentation of the web page using the HTML tags like body and paragraph and h1 and header. The tags themselves are seen as objects, and the web page is referred to as a document, and so there are objects within the document. And JavaScript can reach into the document, find an object, and rewrite it or manipulate it in different ways. Okay, so this is the way it does it. You have to tell it where to look. So we're going to look inside the document, and inside the document, we want it to find this span with the ID of first name. So we're going to tell it to get element by ID. Okay. Now this might look a little bit funny, but this is pretty consistent in JavaScript. JavaScript uses what's called camel case, which is where the first word is lowercase, and then there's no spaces. If there's a second or third or fourth word, there's no spaces. And so how you know that the next word is started is that it's capitalized. Okay, so get element by ID, lowercase get, uppercase element by an ID. And I think this D might even be lowercase. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. All right, so within the document, we're going to get an element by an ID. This is a function. And so within the function, we can tell it what ID we want to find. And the ID that we're looking for right here is called first name. Okay. And then what do we want to do with that element? We've grabbed that element called first name. Now what do we want to do? Well, we want to switch out this right here. So this is called inner HTML. I know it's a weird term, but what that's all about is whenever you have a set of HTML tags, so span/span, right? What's inside there, or inner, what's inside those tags, what's inner to the HTML, that's what we want to target to switch out. So right here, we're going to add dot inner HTML. And HTML gets all uppercase because it's an acronym. Looks like there's a space in there, but there's not. Okay, so once again, we're going to go inside our document. We're gonna find an element by ID, first name, and then we're gonna grab the HTML, or we're gonna grab what's inside the HTML tags of that element span that has the ID of first name, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna assign a value to it, and the value we want is the one in this variable called name. Okay, so if this has gone well, then we should be able to refresh the page, ask me what my name is, and there it is. It does not say your name is Igor, it says your name is Jim. And if we refreshed it, and we said, what is your name? Dave, your name is Dave. And if we refreshed it and said your name is, I don't know, Janice, then your name is Janice. So the whole idea is it's taking the value of name, which is learning from the user when it prompts, and it's importing it, and it's inputting it into this location, which is replacing Igor right there. So what happens if I leave it blank? Your name is. Okay, you said it's blank, so the value of name is blank, and what it puts in here is blank. If you wanted to get complex with it, one of the things you could do is you could test it. You really should, in fact, test your inputs to see if they've been left blank, to see if garbage has been put in there, to see if maybe somebody put malicious scripts in there. You really should test your input, but that's more complex than the initial lesson here. All right. Along these lines, I want to show you another way that you could influence the HTML through the DOM, the document object model. So always we're going to say document, okay? But this time I'm not going to get an element because I already know the name of my element. The name of the element is body. Okay, so this is a little bit weird. If my element were going to repeat, there's going to be more than one paragraph or more than one H1, then this would be a little bit iffy, right? But because there should be one and only one body tag, that I'm just going to name it manually, body, right? Now what I want to affect on body in this case is the attribute style. I want to change something about that attribute. So one syntax that you could use is to add the attribute after the element. Then what I wanted to change about style is I wanted to change a property, and I can actually add that property after style as well. So I'm going to say background color. And I know that looks weird, but it's because it's JavaScript, right? It's in camel case, lowercase, uppercase. And then we're going to tell it what to put in there, what value to put in there. So I could say red or green or blue, or I could give it a hexadecimal code or whatever I wanted to. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give another prompt. So up here, I'm going to give a prompt like var color, so it's a variable named color, and the value of that is going to be whatever the user enters when we ask the user the question, what color do you like? Okay, so we're going to prompt the user for this question, and whatever answer they put in there is going to get stored in the variable color, and then here it's going to be used, the variable color is going to be used to provide a value for the property background color for the style of the body, which would change the entire background color. So let's say save to this, and let's see how that goes. What is your name? It's still Jim. What color do you like? How about blue? Bang, the page is blue. Well, maybe all pages are blue. Let's refresh it. What is your name? My name is Carl. What color do you like? I like yellow. Hey, it's yellow. Well, what if we left it blank? Stays white, because I have an empty null set for the variable color. All right, so this is kind of how you can provide some user interaction with your web pages. You can prompt people for input, and then you can use their input to affect change to the page, whether it's changing out actual content, whether it's changing out style values, all sorts of things you could do. Pretty much anything you can think of, you could do through JavaScript. It just takes some figuring it out. I do want to show you how JavaScript could do a little bit more in-depth. It could do a little bit more in-depth processing, maybe some mathematical processing. So let's ask this question. How about var age? And we'll ask the question, prompt how old are you? Now that might be a rude question for some people, but you can always lie. I don't care. So how old are you? And then what we could do is we could do a little bit of mathematics with this, right? So let's say that we have another variable, and we'll call this one days, and we'll say that days equals age times 365. So if they say that they are 20 years old, then we're going to tell them how many days old they are as opposed to how many years old they are, right? Okay, so our JavaScript has figured out how many days old they are, but now we need to be able to tell them on the page. So we will say paragraph, you are span ID equals your age 20 days old. Oops, I just noticed that I missed my slash here before. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to tell them you are 20 days old, right? Which is not very old at all. But what we want to do right here is take this one, your age. I'm going to do that to it. We're going to take your age and we want to replace it with days. Okay, so once again, we'll go document dot get element by ID, dot, sorry, and we're going to not do a dot yet. We're going to do a parentheses because this is a function. We're going to tell it your age. Go find your age, parentheses and all. I mean, quotation marks and all. Okay, and when you find this, we're going to change out the inner HTML to equal days. Okay, so let's see how that works. We'll save it and we'll refresh. It's going to ask us 3 questions. What is your name? Jim. What color do you like? Yellow. How old are you? 23. Your name is Jim. You are 8,395 days old. And these two stuck together, which means I didn't put a space in there someplace. So up here, right here, needs a space. Try it one more time. My name is Jim. I like yellow. I'm 23 years old. There you go. So that's working just fine. All right, so I just wanted to do a little bit of this so that you could see mathematical processes. Here we're multiplying. We could also add and divide and subtract, use exponents, use modulo, all sorts of things. You could figure out prime numbers, you could figure out the Fibonacci sequence, you could figure out death date, you could figure out just pretty much anything mathematical you could think of, you could figure out with that. Okay, so this is the gist of how this thing works, and if you have any, so go ahead and jump on into the assignment, see if you can do one, and if you have any questions, contact your instructor.